We've a story to tell to the nations that shall turn their hearts to the right. A story of truth and mercy, a story of peace and light, a story of peace and light.
The Bible Institute of Los Angeles, Incorporated, half-century-old Christian Training Center of the West, presents Verse by Verse with Dr. Lewis T. Talbot, Biola Chancellor, and one of America's great evangelical leaders. And now, once again, your radio Bible teacher, Dr. Lewis T. Talbot.
And thank you, Mr. Announcer, and good morning, my radio friends and friends of the Bible Institute of Los Angeles. This is Lewis T. Talbot greeting you and welcoming you to another broadcast of Bible study. And, of course, I greet you on behalf of the students and the faculty of the school that I represent, and also in the wonderful name of our soon-coming Lord. Now, yesterday I told you that we are in the midst of the second and the last semester of the school year with an enrollment not far below 1,000. These young men and young women come to us from all parts of our country and from some foreign countries, and they are being prepared for Christian service at home and abroad. Some of the young men that form our student body are going to be ministers here in the home field. And my friend, if you're up to date with the kind of theological thinking that seems to be on the increase, there is no question in your mind that we need some young men and young women who stand for things and who preach the old book and the old faith. Then some of these young men are going to go forth as missionaries and some as teachers. And we know that all you folks are interested in them, and you're remembering them before the throne of grace. Let me remind you that the Bible Institute of Los Angeles consists of 4 schools. We have 4 schools in one. There is, for instance, the Biola College. And those who are in that college are working toward their Bachelor of Arts degree, and they will qualify for teaching in Christian schools. Then we have the Bible Institute of Los Angeles, and those who have enrolled thus, they devote all of their time to the study of the Word of God. Then we have the seminary that was given my name. It is called the Talbot Theological Seminary. I do not know whether that name has helped it or whether it's been a deterrent. But we have a seminary for young men who have had their Bible study and their college course, and now they're in preparation to become pastors. And then we have the School of Missionary Medicine. The School of Missionary Medicine is for young men and young women who have had their training and have been accepted by some foreign missionary society, and they're becoming acquainted before they leave our shores with the jungle diseases that are to be found in the backward parts of this world. And so the Bible Institute is training about 800 or 900 young men and young women. I want to thank you, my dear friends, for the gifts that you have sent for the special project of this radio broadcast. And that is the building of a radio memorial men's dormitory. You know that this building is going to be called the Radio Memorial because so many of you folks have stating that your fathers and your mothers and your grandfathers and grandmothers used to listen to my broadcast some 30 years ago, but the greater number of them are now with the Lord. Well, I believe, my dear friends, we ought to remember those dear folks who made the radio ministry possible. And we want to erect this radio memorial men's dormitory to house the young men who now have to commute from our downtown location, some 22 miles from La Mirada by bus each day. We have on hand a little over $20,000 for this dormitory, but as you know, that we must have about 80,000 more to erect this building for which there is such a tremendous need. You take this matter upon your heart, my dear friend. If you had a grandmother or grandfather or a mother or a father who used to listen to this broadcast years ago, but they're not in heaven, I'm sure that you'd like to have a little part in the erection of this radio memorial men's dormitory. And now to our lesson. By the way, our address, of course, is the Bible Institute of Los Angeles, 17 California. That is all the address that you need to put on the envelope. Now, we are making a study, my friend, of a subject that is as old as Job. It is as old as this world, I guess. And it is one that distresses thousands of God's people everywhere. And that question is, why do tears and sorrows and heartaches and tragedies come to the people of God? It may be that many of you folks listening to me this morning are on beds of pain, and the question has come to you as to why the Lord has allowed you to go thus and to come through experiences through which you are passing. You know, it is not difficult to understand why godless people who have no place in their lives for God, why it is that they go through all kinds of trouble, because as a man sows shall he reap. And if he sows to unbelief, the reaping must be of the same character as the sowing. But with a child of God, the question arises, why should he suffer tragedies and heartaches and reverses and things of that category? You and I have known wonderful servants of God who have spent years in the vale of tears, years on beds of suffering, and the question is, why? Well, my friends, I'm talking this morning, of course, to people who believe that these things are real. And I'm dealing with the subject with the understanding that all of you folks believe that sickness and sorrow and death are not things that belong to what is called by some the wrong thinking of mortal mind. We know that these things are real, and the Bible teaches that they are real. I just mentioned that because at the close of the broadcast yesterday, a lady called me and said that the answer to the question, why do tears and sorrows and heartaches come to God's people, that the answer to that question is that they're not real at all. That is, that they just belong to a person's mortal mind, and the thing for us to do is just to look upon them as unreal. In other words, folks who think that way, they look upon hospitals and pain and sorrow and suffering and even death itself as things that are not real at all. Well, my friends, I must apologize to that dear lady that called me. She took the time to call me on the phone, but I did not have the time to sit down and listen because I had to go on my way to the hospital, and so it ended up with my saying goodbye, and I hung up the telephone. It was not that I did not want to listen to her, but because she wanted to prove these things to me, that they were not real. She wanted to prove to me, I guess, that I wasn't real, and she wasn't real, and the broadcast wasn't real, and Los Angeles isn't real, and the Hollywood hospital isn't real, and it would take a long time, my dear friends, for me to have been convinced of that kind of thinking, and I never would have gotten to the hospital. And so if I seem to be abrupt to that lady, I offer to her my apology right now. Now, I pointed out to you yesterday that the book of Acts is filled with the account of the sufferings of God's people, and especially those engaged in the Lord's service, consecrated and devoted to the Lord, and filled with the Spirit of God. And during the first 3 centuries of the Christian era, you know that there were thousands of God's people that laid down their lives for the Lord. And you would have thought that when they laid down their lives for the Lord, that the Lord would have made it easy for them. Just put them to bed and put them to sleep and just give their souls a translation. But the Lord hasn't been pleased to do that. There are some folks, my dear friend, who spend years and years and years just outside of the pearly gates. I've told you a great deal about Mrs. Talbot. That is, she has had this disease now for 2 years. I was in the hospital this morning at about 4:30, and I sat by her bedside and could not have any conversation with her because she seems to be past all that. But she's gone through suffering, and the only word that she speaks from time to time is just the word pain. And she said once that nobody knows just how long she's gone through. That is, nobody knows just what she has gone through. And you know that I found myself, my dear friends, beginning to ask myself the question, why is it that a consecrated woman like Mrs. Talbot should go through all of this for years? I want to try and help some of you folks because many of you folks possibly have been on beds of sickness and pain for longer than 2 years. Many of you have heard me refer to Mrs. Martha Snell Nicholson. My dear friends, she was one of the most devoted women that I ever met for the cause of Christ, and she was confined to a bed for almost 20 years. I sat by her bedside just a few weeks before she passed away, and when she did pass away, the funeral service was held in the First Brethren Church of Long Beach, and First Mate Bob and I had the service. And it was easy to talk on that subject, on that occasion, my dear friends, because as I told the congregation when I rose to speak that I had a very, very wonderful text, and the text was Mrs. Martha Snell Nicholson herself. She was a text and her life was a sermon. But in the Word of God, you find 4 reasons why the Lord allows tears and sorrows and heartaches to come to God's people. And the first one, my dear friend, I want to give to you is this. I just mentioned it yesterday, that sorrow is a trust, and if rightly used, enables us to honor God. Now, we can understand other gifts as being trust, such as wealth and wisdom and the power of leadership and scientific skill. When we meet a man who has a marvelous way of making money and everything that he touches seems to turn into gold, we would say to him, if he is a child of God, that is a trust. And one of these days that he will answer to God for that trust in regard to what he did with the money that the Lord has entrusted to him. And along with these trusts, my dear friends, there comes the trust of sorrow and suffering. And let me say that just as God cannot trust some folks with the trust of money, so he cannot trust some folks with a trust of sorrow and suffering. The very fact, my dear friend, that some of you folks do not have anything but a strong body. I've had some folks come to me and say that they have never known what a day's sickness is in all of their lives. Well, it may be, my dear friends, that God could not trust them with anything else. But there are some folks that God can trust with sorrow and suffering. That is, sorrow is to be received as a trust, and we are to meet it, and we are to go through with it, and we are to face it as a trust from God and to be used for his glory. Now, this is set forth, my friend, in the book of Job. You will recall the experiences of Job, that great businessman of the land of Uz, and a man who was devoted to the cause of Christ. And in the first chapter, you read how that the devil came into the presence of God. My dear friends, some folks wonder just how in the world the devil got into the presence of God. But do you know that the devil has access into the presence of God even now? And he is the accuser of the brethren. One of these days, Michael, the Lord is going to say to Michael to clear the court. That is, after the church has been translated, and the devil is going to come down here upon the earth, and there will be the great tribulation period. But back there in the Old Testament, that the devil had access into the presence of God, just as he has now. And when the devil goes into the presence of God, my dear friends, it is to accuse you, and it is to accuse me. And you remember how that in the first chapter of the book of Job, that the devil comes into the presence of God, and he raises the question concerning Job. And the devil challenges God concerning Job. Do you remember how that conversation that began, that conversation that God had with the devil? Do you know that it was not the devil that started it, my dear friend? It was the Lord that started it. And God said to the devil, "Hast thou considered my servant Job? Therefore there is none like him in all the earth." Do you see, God was proud over Job. Job was down there standing for God in all of his ways, and the devil raised a question in regard to the purpose of God, the purpose of Job and his service to God. And so he said, "Doth Job serve you for naught?" God had asked Satan the question, "Hast thou considered my servant Job?" Well, of course he had considered him. Why, that was the kind of a man that the devil would consider. But the devil raised the question in regard to the purpose that Job had in mind in serving the Lord. And so he says, "Doth Job serve thee for naught?" Then the devil says, "Why, look at all that you have given him. You have made him the greatest businessman of the land of us. You have given him great wealth. Just look at his flocks of sheep and camels and all the other things. And he does not have a worry in the world." Then the devil said to God, "You let me put my hand upon him, and he'll curse you to your face before I'm through with him." Have you ever thought, my dear friend, that the devil just confessed that he could not touch Job until God had allowed him to touch him? You know that the devil says, "Hast thou not put a hedge about him?" And every Christian, my dear friends, is right in the center of a hedge. And there is a hedge around you, and there's a hedge around me, just as there was a hedge around Job. And the devil confessed to God that he could not touch Job, and he could not touch one single hair on the back of a single animal in the herds of animals that Job had, until God gave him permission. You know, that encourages me. You know that I'm so glad, my dear friends, that there is a hedge around you and a hedge around me. And if the devil ever gets through, it's because, my dear friends, God has given him permission to do it. The old Puritans used to say about that hedge that it was so high that the big devils couldn't get over it, and it was so thick that the little devils couldn't get through it. And I think that is really good theology. And the devil said, "Hast thou not put a hedge around him, so that no one can touch him?" But the devil says, "You let me get through that hedge." Do you know what the hedge is around you, my dear friends? It's the will of God. That you and I live in the will of God. And you know that God may, for your good and for his glory, to allow the devil to get through the hedge. And the devil said to God, "You let me get through that hedge." And I think, my dear friends, that the Lord looked over the battlements of heaven and took a good look at Job. And he said, "I think that I can trust Job with anything that the devil can bring upon him." And so the devil said, "He is in your hands. I turn him over to you. You can break through the hedge and do anything you please with him except to take his life." And then the devil left the presence of God, and he headed for the land of Uz, and he headed for one man. And you know, my dear friends, there follows in the first chapter and the second chapter of the book of Job that terrible testing. There was Job, and all unacquainted with this discussion between the Lord and the devil concerning him. There he was, happy and prosperous in all of his surroundings and with all of his wealth, and he had a wonderful family. And then there came a reversal of all of this. there came a dark-robed messenger who took away all of his property, all of his sheep and all of his camels and everything else that belonged to his estate. It was all taken away. And you know, my dear friends, that when you strike a man in his property, oftentimes you deal him a staggering blow. I know that when the Great Depression was on and the bottom fell out of the stock market, a lot of folks said that when they lost everything, that they had faith in God, but they don't have any faith in God anymore. I want to tell you, my dear friends, that when they lost all their wealth, they only evidenced by what they said that they did not have any faith in God in the beginning. But Job, he lost everything. Some men never recover from rebusses. But with Job, you know, he lost everything. One morning he waked up and he was a wealthy man, and before the day was over, he was just among the beggars. He was on the dole, if there was such a thing. And then after that, as though that was not enough, there came the awful tidings that his children had all been killed in a cyclone. You remember how that they were all gathered together under one roof, and then a cyclone came and struck the building, and it collapsed, and they were all killed. And each time there was a messenger that came to Job about this. And you know that when he found all of his property gone, he says, "The Lord hath given, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." And then when all of his children had been swept away in that cyclone, 10 funerals on the one day. My dear friends, you don't find that very often, do you? 10 funerals of people all being taken away in the one day, in the one stroke. And when Job heard that, no doubt he said with a broken heart, but he said it nevertheless, "The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." But you know that the devil wasn't through with him even then. For you remember how that the devil just caused Job to be stricken in health, so that from the crown of his feet to the soles of his the crown of his head to the soles of his feet, his body was a mass of festering affliction. And when his friends came to see him, all the neighbors came around when they heard about Job's sickness. So grievous were Job's sufferings that the men just sat around, his neighbors just sat around for 7 days and did not deign to open their lips. They just looked at him. My friend, I wonder if you would like to have a disease that would be so terrible that all your neighbors would come and just look at you for 7 days and not say anything. And when they did say something, I'll tell you what they said to Job. They said, in effect, "Job, you must be the worst man out of perdition. Or otherwise, a thing like this could never have come upon you. You must be a terrible man for God to allow this thing to come upon you." And you know, Job, he said to his neighbors, he said, "I do not know why this terrible, awful aggregation of sorrow has come upon me to swallow me up. But I want to say this," said Job, "though he slay me, yet will I trust him." And God brought Job out of all of his troubles. I've often wondered, my dear friends, what the devil did. I guess that after the devil has swept away all of his property and then swept away everything else, his family, and then swept away Job's health, I guess that the devil said to all the little devils, "Well, we can't do anything with this fella." And they went on their way. And then you read the account of how God brought Job out of all of his troubles and made the latter part of his life more glorious than the former. But I believe, my dear friends, that when the devil went out of the presence of God there to put Job to the test, that all the angels in heaven were looking over the battlements of heaven to watch that contest. And I think that all those connected with the emissaries of hell were all watching it. And there was great rejoicing in heaven. And God brought Job out of all of his troubles, and his life was more glorious than the former. And you and I, my dear friend, are helped today by the story of how Job glorified God in the midst of affliction, and by doing so put the devil to flight. My dear friends, do you know that there will come times in your life when the only book that you will want to read is the book of Job? This book that shows how that the human heart how that the human heart is swept in its deepest depths of suffering, and how God later brings you up and brings you out and sets your soul again in the highest place of safety and peace. Trouble, rightly used, enables us to honor God. And I want to say to you, my dear friend, this: you be careful how you behave when trouble comes. It may be that the devil has challenged God concerning you. And God has looked down into your life and looked into your home. And he has said to himself, as he said concerning Job, I think I can trust that person. And I'm going to take the devil's challenge. And I'm going to let the devil do to that person that he says he is only serving me for what he can get out of it. And my dear friends, you do not know what goes on in the unseen world. And therefore, when trouble comes, no matter what the nature of them may be, no matter what may be the cause, from a human standpoint, no matter who brought it, you be very careful when trouble comes, when the evil days come, because maybe that the devil has challenged God concerning you as he did Job. And you remember this, that when trouble comes and when God allows you to go into the fiery furnace of affliction, my dear brother, you're never alone in that furnace of affliction, because the Lord Jesus has assured us that his presence, his eternal presence, is with us. That's the thing that I love to read. That's the story that I love to read in the book of Daniel, my dear friends, is the story that you find, I think it is in the 3rd chapter, either the 3rd or the 4th chapter. No, it's in the 3rd chapter. You know, of those 3 Hebrew children. And you remember how old Nebuchadnezzar set up that image. And he commanded that every person should worship it, and those who wouldn't worship it, would go into a burning fiery furnace, and there were 3 that stood. And when the music started and the thousands just bowed before, there were 3 men that stood true to God. But we need men like that in the church today. And those 3 Hebrew children, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it's a wonderful story, isn't it? And you remember how that Nebuchadnezzar commanded them to be thrown into the furnace, and he also commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than he had planned to heat it. And do you know, my dear friends, that after they had been in that furnace for about 20 minutes, I guess old Nebuchadnezzar said, "Now I think that we'll get the ashes out, and we'll put them in an urn, and we'll send the urn to the relatives in order that it might be a reminder to them of what happens to those who go against the Lord, the king's commandment." But when they opened the furnace, my dear friends, to get the ashes out, you know, Nebuchadnezzar got a terrible shock. He saw the 3 men, and they're right in the midst of the furnace. Now, God could have kept them out of the furnace, but my dear friend, he didn't promise to keep them out of the furnace. And God hasn't promised to keep you out of the furnace of affliction either. And when Nebuchadnezzar looked in, he saw the 3, but he saw another. And he turned and he said to the crowd, he says, "How many did we throw into this furnace?" And they said, "Why, you threw 3. And Nebuchadnezzar says, "Behold, I see 3, but there is now another. There are 4. And the 4th is likened unto the Son of God." You know, Nebuchadnezzar did not know who that 4th one was, but my dear friends, you and I know who he was. He was the one who said, "Lo, I am with you always." And when you're in the furnace of affliction, my dear friends, and some of you may be in it right now, let me remind you that you're never alone. And I wouldn't be surprised if those 3 Hebrew children, they were singing the Psalms. They were singing the songs of Zion in the midst of the furnace. And when you can do that, sing in the furnace, my dear friends, that's when you reveal to your neighbors that you got something that's real. Thank you for listening. We'll tune in and complete this study tomorrow.
We've a story to tell to the nations that shall turn their eyes to the right. A story of truth and mercy, a story
You've been listening to your radio Bible teacher, Dr. Lewis T. Talbot, Chancellor of the Bible Institute of Los Angeles, Incorporated. Address all mail to Dr. Lewis T. Talbot, 558 South Hope Street, Los Angeles 17, California.
We've a story to tell to the nations that shall turn